Okay, so welcome everybody. This is the first seminar, like I said, for a new series that we have going in web design and interactive media. Um, the main idea for these seminars or for these sessions is to just sort of have fun as we introduce some sort of universal industry relevant topics. And so the first one that we have is free and open source software. And what I have here is a set of slides that talks about the history and the concept and goes through general ideas as far as what it is and how it came to be. We hear this term quite a bit, and usually, there's more to it than we know. I do have to warn you that I have a very tricky slide application here. For some reason, it likes to jump ahead one slide by itself. I don't know if it thinks it's voice activated or not. So if it keeps jumping ahead, I apologize in advance. Just try to see past that. So, like I said, this presentation is a talk on the history and general concepts involved in the invention and advancement of open source technology in general and open source software in particular. We will cover the key players of the invention of the main ideas, the benefits of open source, some legal topics, and some of the media communication technologies that have evolved as a result. The objective here is to give everyone a general background on what open source is, how it came to be, why it is, what it is, things of that nature. I have some slides here which should entertain as well as educate, which was my goal in making them anyway, because I learned some time ago from our friend Marshall McLuhan that anyone who thinks that there is a difference between education and entertainment doesn't know the first thing about either one. Let's see. All right. Throughout history, scientific advances by smart human beings concerning all kinds of technology have given rise to many helpful innovations. Rather recently, within the field of computer science, the idea of open source is one of these useful advances. In a growing trend, technology users and producers are beginning to understand and embrace the benefits of adopting open source methods. Well, that's all sounds good, but what the heck does it mean and where does it come from? Well, are we talking about open source beverages? I, for one, didn't know that open source beverages existed before too long ago. But Open Cola is a brand of cola that is unique in that the instructions for making it are freely available and modifiable. Anyone can make the drink and anyone can modify and improve on the recipe as long as they too license their recipe under what's called the GNU General Public License, which is a type of open source licensing that we'll talk about in a little bit. Since recipes are by themselves not copyrightable, the legal basis for this is rather untested. But the original version of Open Cola is 1.0, and it was released in January of 2001. The current version is 1.13. Although originally intended as a promotional tool to explain free and open source software, the drink took on a life of its own, and 150,000 cans were sold. The Toronto-based company Open Cola, founded by Grad Khan, Cory Doctorow, and John Henson, became better known for the drink than for the software it was supposed to promote. A man named Laird Brown, the company's senior strategist, attributes its success to a widespread mistrust of big corporations and the, quote, proprietary nature of almost everything. So we see this kind of subculture taking off from what essentially is a subculture in itself, which is the open source. To to be sure, there's still some rules in open source, and this is sort of a funny disclaimer on the Open Cola website that I found. So there are some rules to watch out for in open source. And this disclaimer that warns the interested and excited experimenter that, quote, it is a solemn enterprise not to be entered into lightly, as with buying old farm machinery, for example. Free beer?
I like the marriage part better.
Yeah. We also have open source beer, formerly known as our beer, and in Danish, something that I have no idea how to pronounce. It was the first brand of beer with a free recipe. We'll hear quite a bit as we go through the presentation tonight that open source is free as in freedom. It's taken after the term free software. The name free beer is a play on Richard Stallman, who is a key player that we'll talk about quite a bit in a little while here.
Yeah, are you done?
The common explanation is that free software, as we'll talk about tonight, and this is sort of a tagline from Richard Stallman, that it's free as in free speech, not free as in free beer. So what that is sort of a precursor for is this philosophical difference in the generation of open source concepts. And so this is actually an open source product that was developed by IT University in Copenhagen with help from some artists to illustrate how concepts of the free software movement might be applied outside the digital world. Could we get everybody to mute their phones, please?
May I have?
Thanks. The recipe is published under another kind of open source type license, which is called the Creative Commons license. And we'll talk about those in a little bit too. But the key here is that this is actually an open source product, this beer here that was developed by these students and artists. But it kind of works towards the main, like I said, the sort of philosophical concept in one of these tangent movements that we'll talk about, which is that free open source is actually free because it doesn't cost anything, but there is an emphasis on the sort of social movement and the emphasis on free speech. So we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So as you can see, what we are talking about is open source computing. The term open source describes practices in production and development that promote access to the end product's source materials. Some consider open source a philosophy, others consider it a pragmatic methodology. Before the term open source became widely adopted, developers and producers used a variety of phrases to describe the concept. Open source gained hold with the rise of the internet and the attendant need for massive retooling of the computing source code. Opening the source code enabled a self-enhancing diversity of production models, communication paths, and interactive communities. Subsequently, the new phrase, which came to be open source software, was born to describe the environment that the new copyright, licensing, domain, and consumer issues created. The open source model includes the concept of concurrent yet different agendas and different approaches in production, in contrast with more centralized models of development, such as those typically used in commercial software companies. A main principle and practice of open source software development is peer production by bartering and collaboration with the end product, source material, and what we call blueprints of a project, and the documentation that goes with the project. All are available at no cost to the public. So here we look at several examples of open source software. Some of these may or may not be what you knew to be open source, but every one of these are available online. You can just go right to the sites and download them. I've tried most of them, but not all of them.
Don't take the bananas yourself. Okay. Okay.
So we have these examples,
They're not.
and we'll talk a little bit about some of these later, but you might recognize the Mozilla Firefox.
They're not.
I'm sorry, we have somebody talking to their children that everybody can hear. Can that person please mute their phone? We can all hear you talking to your children. So we have Mozilla Firefox, and then we have several of these open source content management systems. Their company logos or their organization logos over on the right. Those are all growing in popularity over the past decade or so. And a lot of these you can sort of use together. So there's you can use Plone, for example, which is an open source content management system, and run that with the Squid open source server proxy, and actually run the software on an Apache server with a Zope management system. So a lot of these work well together, as well as being standalone applications. So we are going to see too that we have sort of two different ideas here that sort of clash and give the history of the open source its character. And the first main idea is the code to modify and adapt software is open, freely, and available to all users. And sort of that's sort of a reaction to an establishment where a major concern of proprietary software developers are able to charge for any changes or modifications in distribution of their software. So what we see in the history of open source are these two differing philosophies. So to back up a little bit and get some historic perspective, we have a general timeline of the second half of the 20th century, highlighting some key points in the development of open source and free software. The first theory about software was proposed by Alan Turing in his 1935 essay, Computable Numbers with an Application to the Decision Problem. We have pretty much an agreed history of computer software that is most often traced back to the first software bug in 1946, which is not so long ago, really. I was at a seminar just before the Christmas holiday, and there was a gentleman there, Dr. Glenn Rickard, talking about the development of computer networks in the United States, and he actually worked with some of these people. There were sort of 4 or 5 key universities and a government agency that were making up the early phases of ARPANET and DARPANET along the east coast of the United States. And he was involved in this when he was a younger man, and he worked with these people that had this first software bug in 1946. So it kind of puts it all into perspective. You think about the second half of the 20th century, it wasn't all that long ago. And then the term software was first used in print in 1958. So in the 60s, we have bundled software at IBM, and the rest of the presentation sort of goes through each of these key points in a little bit more detail. So this is just sort of a 30,000-foot view to kind of give you the scope. We're talking really 1945, like World War II, up until the present. which is a very short time period, relatively speaking, when all this has taken place. In the 70s, in the 60s and the 70s is really when the original sort of hacker culture that started to create software in the very early days um, was angered somewhat by companies like IBM, and actually Bill Gates in his early days of Microsoft decided that they wanted to close up software packages and not offer the source code up to the public in order to make it proprietary. And so really the open source culture is a reaction to that. And we say reaction because we think about the start of software being these early proprietary moves with software operating systems like Unix, which was devised at AT&T and Bell Labs, and early Microsoft programs. Well, these groups that wanted to close up and make software proprietary, um, they were the ones who were doing something different. They were the ones that were trying to change the way things originally were. The way things originally were with software was that there were no passwords, and there were no encryption programs to hide anything, because nobody was trying to hide anything. So you have, um, like I said, IBM, these proprietary efforts. Well, the whole open source culture, the whole open source history is a response to that. They wanted to keep things password free and encryption free, and so therein in the really in the 70s and in the early 80s was when um, Richard Stallman, who is a key player here, and we'll talk about him quite a bit more as we go, was one of the first to sort of take a stand against this change that was making software closed or proprietary. In 1984, we have the X operation coming out of MIT. In 1987, the Perl dynamic programming language was created and released by Larry Wall, who we have, that's him sort of in the middle of the right-hand side. These pictures, I should have said earlier, the top right picture is Alan Turing, and the older gentleman to his left is John Tukey. Through the 80s and the 90s, we have early development continuing. In the 90s, we kind of have sort of a social acceptance of this thing called open source. In 1991 and 92, we have sort of the missing link, so to speak, of the Linux operating system, which was the Linux kernel. That was necessary to create the GNU Linux operating system, which is very, very prevalent today. And I put this 1994 Netscape Navigator in U.S. homes just as a sort of a domestic kind of a cornerstone here to keep this all sort of in perspective. I mean, to me, 1994, I remember getting Netscape Navigator and AOL. It seems like so long ago, but it's really not when you look at this longer timeline here. So again, just a few key points. 1998, term open source software replaces open software. 1998, Richard Stallman creates the GNU public license, which is software. Under this license, the software is free to be modified and distributed, but must remain under the original license. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. OpenOffice.org, which is a very popular product these days, came out in 1999. And it's an estimation that there were about 18 million registered Linux users in 2001. Creative Commons we see coming out in 2002, actually. The organization was founded in 2001. Another big gun these days, Wikipedia, of course, is part of the Media Wiki project, which is sort of a suite or a group of several smaller projects that was founded in 2002. It's all open source. 2004, Mozilla Firefox was released. 2005, we have 29 million registered Linux users, so you can see the rather large jump there in a matter of 4 years. And then you reported 130 million works under Creative Commons license by 2008. So you can just see the numbers here building and building exponentially in a very short time. So here we have Alan Turing, who lived in England from 1912 to 1954. He was a mathematician, a logician, a cryptanalyst, and a computer scientist. He was highly influential in the development of computer science, providing a formalization of the concept of the algorithm, which is really just a fancy use for an effective method expressed as a finite list of well-defined instructions for calculating numbers. Algorithms are used in calculation, in data processing, and many other fields. In a way, they're just sort of like big math equations, if you think about it like that. But everything that a computer does deep down in its core is based on mathematical algorithms. And so Turing was key in developing these early algorithms. In computation, he developed a Turing machine, was called, which played a significant role in the creation of the modern computer. The Turing machine is a theoretical device that manipulates symbols on a strip of tape according to a table of rules. And so, despite its simplicity, a Turing machine can be adapted to simulate the logic of any computer algorithm and is particularly useful in explaining the functions of a central processing unit, or CPU, inside of a computer. So he sort of came up with this idea of teaching a machine rules, or giving a machine a structure, and then allowing that structure to solve problems for you. This is actually a moth taped to the logbook of one of these earlier projects around 1945. This is from the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. It's kind of a joke saying this is the first computer bug. This was actually a bug found in a computer, and then the scientists at the time thought it would be funny to, you can see it says first actual case of a bug being found. This is funny. All right, moving on. This is John Tukey, lived from 1915 to 2000. He was an American statistician, trained as a chemist and as a mathematician. He served in World War II, worked for Princeton University and AT&T Bell Labs. And he was the guy that gave us the term software. And colloquially, the term is often used to mean application software. It's kind of how we use it today commonly. But in computer science and software engineering, software is generally referred to as all information processed by a computer system, programs, data, really anything that feeds into the machine to get the calculations running. So he's kind of a key player in the past. And so moving along our timeline here, in the 60s is when this new idea of bundling software and making it proprietary sort of came onto the scene. In the 70s, what slide am I on here? Give me 1 second. In the 70s, we have Unix, AT&T Bell Labs. Oh, there goes my slides again. Unix is an operating system. It's a proprietary operating system built for multitasking, multi-user computer operating systems. Originally developed in 1969 by a group of AT&T employees at Bell Labs, including Ken Thompson, Dennis Ritchie, Brian Kerningham, um, and Joe Asana. The Unix operating system was first developed in assembly language, but by 1973 had been almost entirely recorded in the language C, greatly facilitating its further development and porting to other hardware. Today's Unix systems are split into various branches developed over time by AT&T as well as various commercial vendors and nonprofit organizations. And this is important. I put this Unix in here because this is kind of a major step in the proprietary, especially operating system um, history, because essentially everything that we're going to look at from here on out is a response to this time period, not specifically to Unix or AT&T or Bell Labs, but to this period in time. And this is the man, Richard Stallman, and he is, if there's one real key player, he's thought of as the sort of the great philosopher of open source, especially open source software. Richard Stallman, just to give you some background, was born in 1953 in New York. He got a BA in physics in 1974 at Harvard. He started graduate studies in physics at MIT, and he fell in with what's called the hacker culture, which was really the original group of these software programmers, if you remember. And this as a result of these proprietary movements, the hacker culture that Stallman thrived on began to fragment. To prevent software from being used on their competitors' computers, most manufacturers stopped distributing source code, as we talked about, and began using copyright and restrictive software licenses to limit or prohibit copying and redistribution. Right, so that's the proprietary. Such proprietary software had existed before, and it became apparent that it would become the norm soon. And this shift in the legal characteristics of software can be regarded as a consequence triggered by the U.S. Copyright Act of 1976 as one motivating force, but it was also very much a commercial and an early corporate movement to create software as a commodity. 1979 restricted unlicensed access to a software product called Scribe that these early hackers were using at MIT. Richard Stallman is quoted as calling this proprietary measure to that software application to be a crime against humanity. And so Stallman's also an American software freedom activist and computer programmer. In 1983, he launched the GNU project, which is this funny word, GNU, initiating the free software movement. So historically, this is sort of the steps that were being taken in response to the proprietary measures. Stallman announced a plan for the GNU operating system in September of 1983 on several ARPANET mailing lists and Usenet. And I have a quote here that I'll read from him from that internet post, that early internet post, of why he wanted to develop this GNU operating system. And it's titled, "Why I Must Write GNU." I consider that the golden rule requires that if I like a program, I must share it with other people who like it. I cannot in good conscience sign a non-disclosure agreement or a software license agreement. So that I can continue to use computers without violating my principles, I have decided to put together a sufficient body of free software that I will be able to get along without any software that is not free. Simple as that. So off he goes. In October of 1985, Stallman founded the Free Software Foundation, which, as you can sort of get from its title, it was an organization to promote the free software movement. In 1989, he co-founded the League for Programming Freedom. He pioneered the concept of copyleft, which is obviously a play on words against the more common term and process of copyright. He was a primary author of several copyleft licenses, including the GNU General Public License, which has become since then the most widely used free software license in the world. Since the mid-1990s, Stallman has spent most of his time advocating for free software as well as campaigning against both software patents that he sees as excessive or an excessive extension of copyright laws. He's also continued to develop a number of widely used software that work with the GNU products. And so he's very much a programmer, but he's also, if not more so, you might even call it social activism, right? So he's very much behind this movement. And just to talk a little bit about some of these ideas that Stallman was a key player in developing. This is copyleft, right? So you can see from the slide that this symbol has no legal meaning. It's a backwards copyright symbol, but it's a symbol that's used in principle in that it's a play on the word copyright. It's used to describe the practice of using copyright law to offer the right to distribute copies and modified versions of work and requiring that the same rights be preserved in modified versions of the work. In other words, copyleft is a general method for making a program or any other work that you create free and open to be used and used again by the public or by other developers. And in doing so, you require all modified and extended versions of the program to be free as well. So Richard Stallman stated that the use of copyleft comes from another hacker, his colleague Don Hopkins, who mailed him a letter in 1984 or 1985, in which was written, "Copyleft, all rights reversed." It's another play on the all rights reserved. The term copyleft with the notation all rights reversed was also used in the early 70s. So the history, the exact time when this concept of copyleft came into being is still somewhat muddied, but it's used today, and it's a major contribution or one of the I don't know that I'd call it major. I think the GNU General Public License would be a major contribution because it's still used so widely today. But this was just another one of Stallman's sort of symbolic contributions to what he was trying to accomplish. The GNU project the GNU project is a free software mass collaboration project announced in September of 1983, also by Stallman when he was still around MIT. It initiated the GNU operating system development, which officially started in 1984. The founding goal of the project was, in the words of its initial announcement, to develop a sufficient body of free software to get along without any software that is not free. To make this happen, the GNU project began working on an operating system called GNU, which is a recursive acronym that stands for GNU is not Unix. There's not too much else, as far as I know, in the semantics or the meaning behind GNU, other than it being this recursive acronym, which is GNU is not Unix. So I imagine it was kind of sort of snubbing their nose at the established Unix culture. This goal of making a free software operating system was achieved in 1992 finally, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but this was sort of the start and the founding of what eventually becomes the Linux operating system. Current work of the GNU project includes software development, awareness building, political campaigning, and sharing of new material that's been created since this time. And so this is, like I said, this is kind of the start, and the recent history is the GNU Linux operating system, which we'll talk a little bit about shortly. Next in our timeline is 1984. This is kind of a sort of an example. This Xorg Foundation is kind of an example of how these early operations would start out. MIT has been a key player in creating these projects that will start out as funded research, and then they'll sort of turn them loose into these open source communities, and let the community continue to develop the software. So without going through this whole sort of convoluted, I have 2 paragraphs here of how the X Windows system was created. I'll just touch on a little bit of it here. The X Windows system was created in the mid-1980s at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1988. MIT formed a member-funded consortium to provide the technical and administrative leadership necessary to support further development of the X Windows system. In 1992, MIT and the membership decided it was at their best interest to move the consortium out of MIT and create an independent standalone organization. And you see this a lot today. You can see all kinds of projects that have come out of MIT that they were sort of official projects within the university. I've used a calendaring, sort of an interactive, data-driven calendaring. It's a rich internet application that's called, well, the suite that this calendaring application comes from is called Simile. If you just Google the word Simile or Simile software or Simile MIT, something like that, you'll find it easily. But they started this project in-house, so to speak, and then sort of turned it loose to the open source communities. And so now it's just out there thriving, and you can, I've downloaded a lot of this stuff and and started building with it. And there are these these great applications that are just out there for free, and you'd spend probably tens of thousands of dollars having a company build one for you. So that's a great example. I should have actually put more of that in this presentation, but it's called Simile. If you have any interest in it, just Google it or send me an email and I'll tell you more about it. But this one here, this is earlier. Obviously, this is concerning the X Windows system. And all rights to the X Windows system were assigned by MIT to this X consortium on January 1st of 1994. So these are just, it's kind of throwaway dates. You don't need to really know all this, but on December 1996, the consortium closed its doors and all rights for the X Windows system were assigned to the Open Group. And to put it into sort of practical, tangible, this X Windows system this is it's called X11 now. If you have a current Mac, you'll have this. If you use command line, if you use your terminal window, you should have this Xterm running in your utilities, which is a folder inside of your applications folder. And it's a command line terminal, to issue commands to the computer, which does the same thing as as if you were to go through a graphic user interface application. And so this just sort of brings it into sort of tangible relevance to anyone running a Mac. You should have that on your computer now. So moving along our timeline, 1985, we have the Free Software Foundation, which I mentioned before, which is founded by Richard Stallman to promote the principles of the free software movement. And as I mentioned before, we have Perl by Larry Wall. Perl is a high-level, general-purpose, interpreted dynamic programming language. Perl was originally developed by Larry Wall in 1987 as a general-purpose Unix scripting language to make report processing easier. Since then, it has undergone many changes and revisions and become widely popular amongst programmers. Larry Wall continues to oversee development of the core language and its upcoming version, which is Perl 6. Perl borrows features from other programming languages, including C, shell scripting, and others. The language provides powerful text processing facilities without the arbitrary data length limits of many contemporary Unix tools. So you see again, there's this effort to augment the proprietary, the proprietary software that's already out there in enclosed format. Let's see. Perl is used for graphics programming, system administration, network programming, finance, bioinformatics, and a lot of other applications. It's a nickname that it has is the Swiss Army chainsaw of programming languages due to its flexibility and power. And it's also referred to as the duct tape that holds the internet together, which is in reference to its ubiquity and perceived inelegance. So it's not the prettiest language, but it's a strong language, and it's rather ubiquitous in what it does, especially in holding the internet together. The most widely used free software license in the world is the GNU General Public License, which again goes back to Stallman. And his project, the General Public License, came out in 1989. And the General Public License is the first first general use license from this earlier idea of copyleft that we were talking about, which means that derived works can only be distributed under the same license terms. And under this philosophy, the GPL grants the recipients of a computer program the rights of the free software definition and uses copyleft to ensure the freedoms are preserved even when the work is changed or added to. This is in distinction to permissive free software licenses, of which the BSD licenses are the standard examples. And so an interesting thing to note about the GNU General Public License is that the license itself is not under the General Public License. So if you use the license if you create something, an application, say, and you want to put it out there to the community, and you license it under the general public, the work is free and open source, but the license that you're applying to it is not. Which, if you think about it, it makes sense because this maintains the integrity of the license itself. It's just kind of funny to think about it like that. But the license's copyright disallows modification of the license. So copying and distributing the license is allowed since the GPL requires recipients who are using the product to get a copy of the license along with the program. So you can't change the license. According to the GPL frequently asked questions, anyone can make a new license using a modified version of the GPL as long as he or she uses a different name for the license, doesn't mention GNU, and removes the preamble, though the preamble can be used in a modified license if permission is used, if permission to use it is obtained from the Free Software Foundation. So again, we do see some rules, but I think that these rules are in place to maintain the integrity of the movement itself. Moving along, in 1989, we have Richard Stallman founding the League for Programming Freedom, which was developed in order to unite free software developers as well as developers of proprietary software to fight against software patents and extensions of the copyright laws. Their logo this is not a bad rendition of their logo, this is their logo. It's pixelated. Statue of Liberty holding the floppy disk and a tape spool, which indicates the time and the period in computer programming when they probably came into being. So we don't see any zip drives there, and we don't see any USB drives, but we do see the tape and the floppy disk. So this slide is in place, and it comes up in 1998 because what really we have seen up until now has been a reaction, or you could say, to the differing philosophies, and the first one being proprietary and the second one being open source, which we've talked about quite a bit, and I think is pretty clear. What happens in 1998 is another split, this time within the branch, the open source branch. So you have the proprietary branch, you have the open source branch, and then the open source branch in 1998 or thereabouts splits into two. So now essentially we have these three branches. And what's interesting about the second branch here is the difference in what became to be called the open source branch and the free software philosophy. So we have the two, and there's some key differences that are interesting to note. In 1998, as a part of the free software community, splintered off and began campaigning in the name of open source. The term was originally proposed to avoid a possible misunderstanding of the term free software, but it soon became associated with philosophical views quite different from those of the free software movement. Nearly all open source software is free software. The two terms describe almost the same category of software, but they stand for views based on fundamentally different values. So you have one of these branches, one philosophy is open source, is a development methodology. Free software is said to be a social movement. So again, the open source is more concerned as a development methodology. Free software is a social movement. For the free software movement, the free software is an ethical imperative because only free software respects the user's freedom. By contrast, the philosophy of open source considers issues in terms of how to make software better in a practical sense. It says that non-free software is an inferior solution to the practical problem at hand. For the free software movement, non-free software is a social problem. It's considered to be a social issue. And the solution is to stop using it and move to free software. So we see a fairly distinct philosophical differences in these two branches of what was formerly, sort of all referred to as open source. The distinction can be um, sort of explained, elucidated by calling one open source and one free software. So free software is sort of Richard Stallman's team, and he's sort of synonymous with the free software movement ever since. In the 90s, we have general acceptance of the growing development in the computer programming communities, the growing industry, which is huge at this point. There are a lot of strong open source and free software products out there on the market for users to download and set up. Right around this time, 1991, this is Linus, and he is one of our key players in this history because he developed this sort of missing key that started out with the GNU project, which was the Linux kernel. And so he got together with with the developers and the programmers that have been working all along since 1983 on the GNU project, and put the whole thing together. And soon thereafter, we had the GNU Linux operating system. And so I think that it's more sort of on the market. We know it as Linux, the Linux operating system, but in order to give credit where credit's due, we call it the GNU Linux operating system. Right. Here's our milestone of this screaming fast, state-of-the-art MacBook Pro here in 1994. This is just to sort of put it all in the perspective. And then quickly we move through 1998 with the Mozilla browser. And again, the term open source software is kind of colloquially replaces the term open software, so we kind of shorten that just to say open source, as we still do today, even though we might be talking about free software as well. 1998, the big one on the scene was the OpenOffice, which is a office suite of products that's fully free and open source. Is available for very fast download, as a matter of fact, and it sort of you might say it's a open source response to Microsoft Office. It was developed by Sun Microsystems, and if you create an open office, you can easily save as with file extensions. So if you that are usable in other proprietary software applications. So if you create a text document in OpenOffice, you can save it as a .doc file or a doc file, which is a proprietary file extension for Microsoft Word. Same with if you create a spreadsheet in OpenOffice, it's fully compatible with Microsoft Excel. And a lot of other files as well, comma delineated, other industry standards. But this is one of the big and more popular open source application suites, really. In 2001, we have an estimated 18 million Linux users, which is astounding. If you look back, where were we? Here, 1991, it's invented. 2001. There are 18 million people using it. Plus, they have a really cool penguin logo. 2001, Creative Commons was founded as an organization. These licenses, which essentially could be a whole presentation in itself, and I'm not sure how familiar folks are with Creative Commons licenses, but these are licenses that you can apply to the work that you create that designate pretty specifically how the work can be received and used and changed and reshared by viewers, by other developers, by other artists, just other people out in these various communities. And so if you go to the Creative Commons website, they do a really good job of breaking these down as far as explaining what each of them offers. And essentially what you're left with is sort of a buffet of choices depending on how much you want to share of your work. So yeah, like I said, there's a lot to it, but the licenses themselves are pretty self-explanatory. But I would encourage everyone to go and check those out. 2002, we have the Wikimedia organization and all its sub-projects. This is just sort of mind-boggling how much data goes through this suite. But we all know Wikipedia, and there are a lot of other ones here that are really a lot of fun to go through. Wiktionary, WikiQuote. WikiQuote still seems to be pretty bare bones, but they're getting some stuff. I actually found some Stallman quotes in WikiQuote. So 2004, Mozilla Firefox, obviously a very big one we all know and probably love. 2005, then, a couple years later, it's like 11 million more estimated users of Linux. So just growing and growing and growing. I would almost say exponentially. Up until 2006, these are very hard to estimate, but this is this is a fairly reliable to very reliable source that these numbers come from. But you can just see this this rise in the open source operating system number of users. The Linux user growth chart. Way back in 1994 when it was next to nothing. All the way up through 2006, and for some reason they stopped counting around 2005, 2006. This chart says 2006 on it, but when I was looking for more of this data, I'm not sure why they stopped counting, or maybe they just moved to a different site that I just didn't find or something. But at any rate, we see this growth going at least up until 2006, and I'm sure it's just higher now. This is one of our last key players that I was going to mention tonight. This is Tim O'Reilly, and you all probably know O'Reilly Media. If not, check it out. It's a big company now. They do a lot of book publishing and source publishing, and he's a big advocate of the open source. And so I don't know if you saw the flyer that was going around, for the talk, but it kind of posed Tim O'Reilly holding up a sort of a hand-drawn open source sign, and then had Richard Stallman sort of diametrically opposed, holding up I think there was like a cartoon caption of him saying, the free software was the way. And so you sort of have these two philosophies, like we talked about a little bit earlier. And so this is Tim O'Reilly, open source advocate, and so he's just he's a good, he's a strong key player on the sort of open source philosophy side. But I think his company O'Reilly Media is much more well known than the man himself. So just in closing, I just wanted to put up a couple of benefits of free and open source software. From a collaboration standpoint, it's open and public. There's open and public collaboration behind each project. Anyone is free to modify the open source software to suit their individual person, business, or school needs, which has inherent value. Versatility is a great benefit, can be used on older hardware and thereby is beneficial to all, and especially to lower income individuals and others in third world countries and developing countries who get donations of older computers, who get donations of one computer per child, that initiative. And these people, they can take advantage of open source software solutions because a lot of them are what we call backwards compatible. Open and public collaboration behind each project. I think I went backwards. Economic benefits. If it doesn't cost you anything, there's obvious savings there, but the savings monetarily lets one invest in other endeavors. So if you're, working in your organization, you can put your resources towards other goals. As far as an educational benefit, it allows teachers to expose students to a wide range of software products. There's not a lot of commitment on the on the part of the teacher or the student in that you can turn a student on to an open source product and they can go and get it and download it and start it up and see what they can get out of it. It's a great way of learning, to be hands-on, and which probably most of our students, I think, are. Being online students, you have to have a certain amount of independence inherent in your learning process. But again, with no real risk, no real financial risk. Security benefits. This is kind of a big one. Detect and change or delete any, attacker programs of any sort. Backdoors or spyware is written into the program. If this happens, the users will be able to detect and correct the problem as opposed to having a proprietary closed format. You have to, what do you have to do? You have to email support or call the 800 number or, submit a ticket to the help desk, which could take, any amount of time. If you have access to the source code and the problem resides in the source code, then if you have people with those skills, then you can eradicate the problem on your own. The last benefit is it's free, and yes, it is free like free stuff, or free beer, as the earlier slide said, but it is more importantly that we know from Richard Stallman is that it's free like freedom, or free like the freedom of speech. And this is just sort of a side note that I wanted to put on here. If you're interested in this whole story of the invention or the history of open source, free and open source, there's a really interesting documentary called Revolution OS, and I've watched it free on YouTube, so I'm sure you can maybe buy a DVD or something, but feel free to check that out. It's good. It has interviews with all these guys, and it's fun, to read about them and to see their pictures and hear about what they did, and then to hear them talk for themselves is always interesting. It seems like a really good documentary, and that's called Revolution OS. and that's what I have. If anyone has any questions or comments, I'd be happy to talk about them or answer any questions.
No, I'm good.
You're good?
The only thing I've used open source, actually, first last year, I happened to be traveling during classes, and where I was going, I figured I was going to have access to a data processing program, and there wasn't one, but we were able to download the open source, open office, and I found that the document did not, when I uploaded it, it didn't mesh with the Word documents.
It didn't. So you had.
Even though we saved it as a doc.
So were you creating new files in OpenOffice, or were you opening Word documents and then editing them, or?
No, creating a new one. And when I uploaded it as my assignment, it went nuts.
Oh, and so when you uploaded it into the classroom.
Into
the
classroom.
Oh, okay. Did you save the file as an ODT file, or did you save it as a .doc?
.doc.
Really?
Yeah.
And it was goofy when you uploaded it?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
I was like, well, that didn't work.
Oh, that's interesting. I'll have to try that out. So was it when you uploaded it, did it just got jumbled kind of, or?
Yeah, it was supposed to have been we were supposed to be using the Corel note taking form.
Yeah.
And so I had it all split and everything, and when I went to upload it, it just jumbled everything. It wasn't split anymore.
Okay.
But it was like, wow. It wasn't like that when I saved it.
Yeah.
And when I went back and looked at the file, it still wasn't that way, but when I uploaded it, it just jumbled the whole thing. And it was like, well, there went that homework assignment.
Yeah. Well, but you still had the original file, so not all was
Right.
lost. And what's that the Corel note taking thing?
The Corel, it's where you've got like the top, which is your main subject, and then on the side you split your paper into like one column that's like a third, and then you've got a large area, so you can like take notes on the side, basic notes, do mind map type things in the large section.
Okay.
It's just a specific type of note taking. It was for the strategies and online learning.
You know what I would have done in that case? I would have output it to a PDF and then uploaded the PDF.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I didn't have access to that. Not there. I did eventually, but I told the teacher what was going on, and she's like, well, when I got to my destination, she's like, well, just upload it to me, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Yeah.
And she understood, but I just was really surprised that it did that.
Yeah, that's weird.
Because I saved it as a doc.
Right. Yeah, I'm surprised. But you can, just for future reference, if you ever run into that problem, you can output to a PDF from from the open source or from the open office application, which should probably upload fine. But no, thanks. That's interesting. I'll have to try that out. I don't know that I've ever tried to do exactly that, but I'm gonna try that and see if I can.
I don't know if it was just the formatting. Sometimes when you try to upload tables, even it messes it up.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't know.
All right. Well, thanks.
But it's nice to have when you run across a situation where you don't have Word, and you still need to make a document.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I have used it.
Good. Very good.
I can say I use a lot of crash course in Joomla.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Good.
Joomla's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to play with it, but Blender is pretty incredible.
Okay, good. Yeah, we're gonna the next seminar is gonna be it's gonna be sort of like a hands-on, well, like not for people that attend, but it's gonna be called a practicum. So we're gonna sort of look at some open source applications, and I'm gonna talk about Joomla actually. So yeah, that should be
I have
fun.
a question about Joomla.
Yeah.
I actually have been trying to download Joomla, but I keep running into a problem of getting the files. The only site I seem to find it on is cloudaccess.net.
Okay.
They charge for their Joomla demo.
Oh, don't buy it. Don't ever. Yeah, don't ever pay for anything like that.
Okay, because I knew that it was open source, and that's kind of where I've been stuck. And because I have a client that's interested in having their site built with Joomla.
Okay, you know what? This is what you do. Don't. In fact, I came across. Actually, I was installing Joomla locally recently, and I came across a disclaimer that, in fact, said that there's like a scam going on that people are trying to get people to pay them for Joomla in some way. So don't make sure you don't ever pay for it. But what you should be able to just go to the Joomla.org site and download it from there. Is there a reason that you can't just go to the Joomla.org site?
Well, I guess I just went and Googled Joomla. And
Okay.
the only thing that came up was through Cloud Access to get a copy of Joomla.
Okay.
No. Just go to Joomla.
Yeah, just go right to the Joomla site, and in fact, for your client, you don't even have to set them up. There are demos available that you can just walk them through the demos or have them look at them if they're not nearby. But there's demos on there, and then you can download the software right from there.
I learned through Joomla University. The price of the lifetime membership went up, but you can pay per month, and that's how I learned. I took a crash course, and it's all good. I had some problems, but there were some technical issues that didn't work out. But that was the way I learned, and it served me well, I can tell.
Yeah, good. And they're
Now you're saying that you were doing Joomla local and not on a database, is that right? Or through a server?
That are you asking me that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've both actually. I have a web host that set it up remotely for me, and then I'm also configuring it locally on my computer.
Okay, so you can do it locally. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yes. You go. There's a couple things you need to do, but I use Bluehost.
Okay.
And you can do it through their system. There's a couple of disadvantages, but Bluehost is excellent, and it's $6.95 a month, and you can set up Joomla, WordPress, Drupal, whatever you want right through it.
Good.
Flexibility, but no, don't pay for Joomla itself.
Yeah. Okay. Right. And well, maybe in the practicum we can talk about setting it up locally too. I don't know if that'd be too advanced for most people or not, but I mean, it sounds like we've got to have a couple of people here that would probably benefit from talking about that. So
that would be great. That's something I'd be most definitely interested in learning about.
Yeah, I mean, having it run locally is kind of I mean, it's an important step. So.
Absolutely.
All right, cool. Well, it's good to hear people are using Joomla. Yeah, I mean, I love it too. I've been using it for about I don't know 9 months or something. So, but there's always something to learn, and the support community is huge. There's so much documentation out there to answer like every question I've ever had. So.
Lynda.com also has excellent tutorials for that, as well as a million other things.
Yeah. All right, very good.
I also use Alice. Played around with Alice when I was taking my Java class.
Oh, good.
And there's a lot of wonderful stuff. There's a lot of developer software and word processing, and if you write code, I forget what it's called. There's some wonderful stuff out there that's open source.
Yep.
So it's a great asset.
Yeah, I agree.
one other question. This is regarding Visual Studio for Microsoft. Now, I've been told that that's an open source program. No. Okay. That's the Microsoft product. I've used that. It's in the family with Expression Web, which would use to be front page, and Visual Studio is more oriented towards PHP and kind of web programming. Okay. It's a little bit. It's the same idea as Dreamweaver, but it's just a little different orientation. It's probably more for programmers, designers.
Okay. Well, any more questions or comments? I'll just put up, this is the slide for the upcoming free and open source practicum. So this will be seminar number 2. And yeah, I think this one will be a lot of fun. So hopefully we get some people to call in. And
when is that?
That will be February 1st. I'm sorry, March 1st.
March 1st.
Yeah, and
is that only open to students or open to grads?
I'm sorry?
Will I still be able to attend something like that even though I'll be a grad?
Oh, sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah, I think we're making these open to, pretty much anyone who's interested in coming, so.
All right.
Yeah. So, yeah, I lost my slide. It just closed out on me, but that'll be next month, March 1st. And I'm going to try to, let me ask you guys this. Would you be able to attend these seminars if they were during the day as opposed to being this late at night?
Yes, anytime I'm good. I don't know. It depends. Sometimes I can't do it night, so.
Okay.
So don't go by me.
Okay, all right.
If I want to attend one bad enough, I'll make sure I'm there.
All right, sounds good. Okay, well, we'll be letting everybody know when the next one will be up, but it'll be on Joomla, and we'll have some fun. So thanks a lot. It was great talking to everybody, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, good night.